is up, my people? Welcome to Fellowship Bible Church's Sermon Spotlight, where we're coming at you each and every week with a fresh service to debrief in effort to send biblical truth. What better way to do that than by the power of conversation? I'm Mark Francis in the host seat again today. And this time we are joined with a guest you've been on a couple times now, maybe.
I have,
This is
yep.
Miss Rose Lauck.
Yes.
How are you?
I'm fine, thank you.
Good. Thanks for being here. Excited
excited
to
to be
hear.
here.
I'm excited to have you.
Yeah.
Once again, the perspectives that you bring with the behind the scenes production and creative and artistic and worship backgrounds, that's all what you get a chance to bring today. So I'm excited.
Me too.
And once again with us is Pastor Mark Carey. How are you, Mark?
Very good.
Good. Well, happy Thanksgiving
Yeah.
to each of you guys.
Thank you.
We've got a couple of days until that happens. So any big plans for either of you?
Well, my daughter's coming, and I'm going to be a grandmother, so I'm excited to see her.
Oh,
That
did I
is
know that?
very
Yes,
true.
you knew that.
Okay.
Actually. You just forgot.
Did
So,
Did I know that?
So
Yes.
this is,
Yeah.
the Christmas before.
And she's
baby
coming
comes.
along. What's the due date?
January 6th.
Oh, that's right. I knew this.
Yeah.
So I'm excited.
Wow.
It's very exciting. And that's going to be your first.
Yes.
Yeah.
my First.
Are you scared?
No, I'm not scared, but I'm really excited because I'm excited to do all the things I wanted to do when my kids were little and couldn't. So I've started a journal for her already.
Oh,
and
neat.
I'm praying for her on a regular basis, and I want to share with her all the things that I feel like God is teaching me, so that her name is Adeline Rose, so that Adeline Rose will know, we'll remember the stories of Jesus,
Cool.
Neat.
and we'll
You know,
do some of the important things.
we were visiting this summer with, or some point, it was last fall, with Chet and Ruth Ann Martin. Chet had been a former elder here. They retired out in Ohio. But Ruth Ann gets these Bibles, and she, with her two grandkids, and she over, I don't know, a year or two, she writes and notes in those wide margin Bibles. And when those kids, and she'll do it for 18 years. That's right.
Oh,
When they
wow.
graduate from high school, she gives them that Bible
Wow.
to her
so
grandkids.
cool.
Yeah.
Something
so
to pass on.
Something to pass on. But
Yeah.
it's a special gift for 18 years, I think it is, who writes
Wow.
those. Anyway.
Right.
Well,
And
it's
it
a great
ties into-
segue.
Yeah, it ties
Yeah.
into the sermons and stuff from last week, because I believe so strongly that, like, God already has a story for Adeline, and my prayer is that He'll draw her close to His heart, and that she will become a passionate follower of Him at an early age. And so her story is being written right now inside her mother's womb and in the hearts of her family and her grandparents. And
Neat.
yeah.
Well, as a continuation in this overflow series, this overflow focus, we're engaged now of how do we reach out into the world around us. And so the prior 2 weeks was really diving into showing our need and showing other people that they have a need. And now we turn the corner. I really feel that, okay, we've got to pass on what our need is, but what is our story, so we can engage others around us to share His story. But before we do that, we might as well ask the question of others around us, what is your story? And get a chance to engage the world. So Rose, I'll turn your way first.
Okay.
Give us a brief kind of just takeaway that you had from this past week.
Well, I think I've listened to this sermon now 6 times.
That's
And
impressive.
I think, yeah.
We need an answer to that. Why is it 6 times?
Well,
Either that or get a life, Rose.
Yeah, right. Well, I listened on Saturday night a little bit. I didn't listen like focused listening. I was nearby listening, and then I listened really intently at 9:00, and then again at 10:45 I listened, remotely. And then because I knew you had invited me here today, I really wanted some focused listening. So
yeah.
I did some focused listening on my own after, and then I listened a little bit on the way in this morning because there were a couple of technical details that I wanted to hear how they had come across.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
is that 5?
That's
is that
a lot.
6?
That's
I don't know.
4,
It's just
at
a
least
lot.
4 or
Yeah,
5.
Yeah. So I think my big takeaway, once again, was just the simplicity of the gospel. How really simple it is, and how we add so much complexity to it. And when we listen to what others have to say, and then we are prepared with what we can say, then they just have to believe, So I think that's what struck me once again in
The
this.
grace, message, simplicity of the gospel.
Yeah, and I'm all about the creativity and the storytelling and those artistic forms, but at the core, the simplicity.
Yeah. Mark, I'll turn to you. We do like to ask this question. Were there things that missed the cut? Were there things that you didn't get a chance to share or impart to our congregation that now you have this freedom to unpack a little bit more?
Well, one was how to place a microphone properly on the pulpit so it wouldn't roll off. And Rose,
This is the Rose that Mark was referring to if you were watching
I thought you were going
online.
to come on and say and chew me out publicly.
Yeah.
In Fellowship 3, we saw it happen. It's okay.
Well,
You
I
don't-
was gonna. We'll just take a rabbit trail for a second.
A microphone falls, yes.
There are some. That microphone is a very expensive microphone that you dropped. It has been dropped before.
Why don't they make them square?
It has
so
been,
they will sit and
it
not
has
roll.
been repaired before. But we have some pretty pricey microphones, and they're small, and I've dropped a couple of those. And like the microphone was fine after you dropped it, but I've dropped a couple of microphones here, and then we go and plug them in, and I have just fried them. So Mark, you're
okay.
in good company.
God takes care of
Yeah.
the simple.
It's grace
Once again.
given to those that break microphones.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll come your way.
Well,
again. Yes.
Yeah, there was various things that I was telling someone afterwards. We could do a whole learning center class or a biblical training center class, a whole semester on evangelism and unpack these things more thoroughly. So this was. It felt rushed to me. I mean, we covered a lot of ground, reminding people to listen to some other people's stories. Well, you could talk a lot about good listening skills. Things like, not butting in when someone, and certainly, I mean, I suppose we all do this. Someone is sharing their story, and one of the no-nos is to interject. Yeah, I remember when that happened when I was, and you project your story
Turns it
then
right back to myself.
Yeah, right. And so just unpacking that a little bit more, that when you're listening to their story, listen, to their story. Open your ears, close your mouth, and make mental notes, and not notes of what you're going to retort back, but really listening with care, so you're hearing what they're saying. So we could have dealt with that.
That's not necessarily even a spiritual, educational thing. I mean, that's like just social human awareness. How can we do a better job of learning about others and unpack and listening skills?
Right. And there are rank pagans who are going to hell who probably have better listening skills than I do. So that's one. Sharing your story, we could have unpacked that a lot more, because I didn't mention you don't necessarily want to get into all the details of your past life apart from Christ. Some people have some pretty colorful stories to tell. I remember a guy, a friend of mine, who had a very colorful past, and I mean, in fact, his story got on Pacific Guard Mission, the Unshackled program. It's a radio program out of Chicago, and it's Unshackled. And it's these stories of debauchery and whatever, and how they came to Christ. His story made that. But when he would share it publicly, he didn't get into the dirty, gory. He just said, "Look, I was bad enough to go to hell, and Jesus saved me." and there's that. So I think we could have talked more about how we share our story.
The other part of that, Mark, the other part of listening, though, is learning the art of asking good questions.
That's right.
And I think that's something that I've spent a lot of time with in my homeschooling background, like helping students and others think through what are good questions. And if you ask the right questions, then you can help people to start to experience their own separation from Christ. So along with listening, formulating questions as opposed to formulating sentences that you're going to say.
Being interrogative and not declarative.
Yeah.
And more of that is it's an art. Greg Kokel, who's a Christian apologist out of California, he's got a ministry called Stand to Reason, has a book called Tactics that I've been pushing for years. But it's the art of asking good questions. As you engage people in evangelism, ask good questions. He calls them the Columbo questions of the old TV program,
Sure.
Lieutenant Columbo. He always asked questions, and I do think it is an art that has to be cultivated on being able to that. And that's where good listening comes in. So listening, and then you know how to formulate a good question. And what you want is you want people to walk away from a conversation with you, whether you got to the gospel or not, feeling like they've been heard, that they've been cared for, and that there's someone who, what you've done is built a bridge. They'll come back and continue a conversation with you at some point.
If they're like me, they'll hear a question. You've asked them a question. In the moment, they try to answer that question, but they'll often walk away with that question still burning in their head. And I've had people come back to me and say, hey, I thought a little bit more about that question, and I think this is my answer to that question. And so now they've re-engaged you in a conversation because of those questions.
Yeah, yeah. It is a sensitivity to other people, and people who ask good questions demonstrate a sensitivity. I think
God
to other
can
people.
develop that over time. I mean, my story is like yours, Mark. My story is when I was 4, I think, is when I came to faith. So there's not a lot to that. But when I look back on my life to where God has led me now, he put me in a position where, yes, I was like a 100% commission salesperson like 10, 15 years ago, where I had to sell oil and grease and maintenance products to people that I had no understanding of how to engage with them, and nothing in common either. I don't go hunting. I don't go fishing. I'm not an outdoorsman. I'm not a greasehead either. I don't go and fix cars. But I had to go sell products to people that were completely not in my wheelhouse, and learn the skill set of listening to them, learn the skill set of sitting with them for a half an hour and just letting them talk about their lives. And they don't care about my life. And so therefore I shouldn't reveal anything about myself because they don't care. I'm allowing them to feel comfortable with me, so then they will buy some product from me that hopefully can put food on my table.
Yeah.
And it was a complete 100% not my personality type.
Yeah.
Not what I'm good at doing. But God put me in that position to put food on the table for my family, to learn a skill set that was listening and allowing people to feel comfortable with me, to where I could then share something and, at the time, sell a product. But I was also selling other things too. I was selling Christ and selling God at the same time. But God developed me in that way to give me the ability to be a better listener, because he knew I needed it.
Well, and so it does come down to personality, but the nice thing about asking questions is you can be a crazy introvert, and asking questions is safe. You can be a loud extrovert, and you can still ask questions. I mean, asking questions is an art that can be developed for anybody. I had a couple kids of our kids in college days go sell books for the summer. Southwestern Book Company. They go door to door around the country and sell books. And my one son said, "Man, what he learned in terms of being able to do that, listening to people, finding the conversations and that would open the door for that," he said that pays some wonderful dividends in terms of how you interact with people.
Yeah.
So growing in our listening skills is crucial. Then learning it's a sensitivity to the Holy Spirit. I mean, you just got to let the Spirit. Now that's kind of, it's kind of ethereal there, but you have to, as Paul says in Galatians 5:26, you got to stay in step with the Spirit, in tune, because at some point, if it's appropriate, and I think you'll know when it's appropriate, you can begin to interject something of your story without them feeling like you're cutting them off and that type of thing. So at some point when it's natural, you share, and you ask permission. Would you mind if I shared with you what Jesus Christ means to me? And no one's going to say, "No, I don't want to hear what. And if you've listened to their story, you've built a little passport so that they're going to listen to your story. And again, it doesn't have to be a 15-minute long, expansive, half-hour long thing. It could be very compact, short, and that's why I went into how to share your testimony in 3 minutes. This is what I was before I trusted Christ. This is how I came to know Christ, and this is what my life has been different.
So there's a preparation. There's a
there
little
is.
bit of understanding and being intentional with that. But I love the building blocks of this little mini series that we're in of the week before, of having the spiritual glasses, the goggles, to at least see the people from that perspective. Now we're talking about listening to them,
Right.
and the value and the impact of a story,
Right.
and how we all have a story to
Yes,
share.
and Rose, you guys put out that little handout in the back with the little balloon comments, stuff like that.
Yeah.
It's a tool. People could go home, grab that thing, and fill it in, and man, they've got a 3-minute personal testimony.
And I think part of what you're talking about, Mark, is we don't want. I don't think you want people to get the misunderstanding that it's not always a one-time conversation with the salesman, because I have someone that I've been praying for since the beginning of November. And I've had a relationship, the one cards, and I've had a relationship with this person for 4 years, and so now I've been praying specifically now for the opportunity to share with her my story and the gospel. And our relationship is a professional relationship, so it's not as if we're having coffee on a regular basis, but I'm trusting the Lord. It may not be next week, and it certainly may not be in April. But when I see this person again in September, as I probably will, that may be the opportunity. But the fact that the Lord is keeping her in front of me because I'm praying for her. And so every time I see her, I do see her with different glasses than I saw her before I started praying for her. So I do think we have to remember that it is sometimes it's a relationship that we've developed over time, over years, and hearts for people.
And you may not be the only person. There might be we're part of the process. Maybe there might be 3 or 4 other people that God puts in their life. Going back to the praying about this thing, as you said, that's what Paul said in Galatians, in that Colossians 4 passage. He starts with that: be devoted to prayer and praying for us at the same time, that we will know how to say it, what to say. We'll make it clear. So we have to bathe these things with prayer. And I think that's that communion we have with the Holy Spirit, that then we got to be careful that we don't not say something, because I've tried to make the point that no one is ever brought to faith by simply watching you.
Yeah.
There has to be a conversation that takes place. There's a content that has to be believed. And
how exciting it is, though, that God uses, it's exactly what you were saying. Like, he doesn't, the rocks, right? What does Christ say on at the triumphal entry? That if the people are silent, even the rocks will cry out, right? So yeah, God can make the rocks cry out, or as the leaves are falling from the trees, the leaves spell out, whatever. Sure, God could do all those things, but God just gives us the grace and the beauty and the wonder to see it with our own eyes when he allows us to be part of the process.
And the privilege, we're a part of that, that
Yeah.
he's using us to be a light and a witness and a way to bring honor and glory to him by how we live our lives, to then being able to verbalize and communicate the truth that who we know about God. And it might not be much, and it doesn't have to be much. Just the simplicity of the gospel that you said, Rose, that yes, we have a need. There's a hole in our soul. Christ died for us to fill that need. And, all we got to do is believe it.
Right.
Just accept it. It's a
Right.
gift.
Right.
And if we can communicate that in 30 seconds to somebody,
yeah,
maybe there's a light bulb moment for them.
I think there's a lot of things that keep us from being involved in evangelism, and fear is one of them. They say one of the greatest fears that people have is, as believers, is sharing our faith, because we don't know we're going to mess it up, or we don't know what to say, or things like that. And so one of the purposes of that message this weekend was to help people realize you don't have to complicate it. Just open your mouth, open your ears first, listen, as you're prayerfully, and then tell your story. And if that's as far as you get, fine. It may take months, maybe years. You're building, but at some point, as we point them to his story, you don't have to answer all the questions that people may have. We can eventually help resource that. There's people in the body of Christ that we can point them to. But the bottom line is, where do you think you're going to spend eternity? If you were to, it's the old evangelism question. If you were to die tonight and stand before God and he were to say, why should I let you into heaven? What would you say? Now, this is a question that just to throw out because it popped into my head right now because I had a conversation with somebody once recently on this. Do you think, Rose, you've shared your faith a lot over the years.
Sure. Yeah.
Mark too. Do you think people today, and maybe I'm thinking of younger people, but that kind of a question, those old EE questions, if you were to die tonight, stand before God, and he were to say, why should I let you into heaven? What would you say? Is that kind of a question as impactful and effective today? Someone said we're asking questions that no one's asking these days, and we got to maybe build a longer, better bridge to people. But how do you engage that?
I think I don't know how to engage it, Mark, and I'd appreciate your insight there. But I do get to work with young people on a regular basis, and I would say that one of the biggest obstacles, the last person I encountered who really was not receptive to even really hearing the gospel. Well, they were willing to let me verbalize it, but they weren't gonna. Their bottom line was they did not really believe there was a God at all. Mm-hmm. So, and that eternity was
a myth,
didn't exist really, and that all we were was finite. Born, die, no soul that would linger forever. And so I have no idea how to overcome that. And I don't know. I no longer have the opportunity to impact that person. And I don't know what will happen, but I made sure that person heard the gospel every chance they got from everyone that could possibly hear it. So I know they've heard the gospel, but will they?
But in
will
that,
we overcome
in this
that?
postmodern, post-Christian world where, what was it a couple of weeks ago where our Vice President Kamala Harris was in a classroom basically saying, well, that's your truth. Mm-hmm. You caught that news clip, and that's very postmodern, your truth. Well, that's wonderful for you. I don't need that.
I have my own truth.
I have my own truth, and it's good for me. And
it's very interesting. It's really interesting to me because for the first time, I engage students regularly using the Francis Schaeffer series. How should we then live? And the thing about that series is there is this underlying assumption about the truth of the Bible. And this idea that God's word is complete and total truth, which we know it is, but there's an element of faith there. Mm-hmm. When I even expressed that God's word is truth, there's an element where I'm expressing faith. Now, I've seen it over and over again, and we can point to historical evidences that it's truth. But convincing today's young person of that using the word of God is really challenging.
It is.
And I think that there's a sensitivity to the relationship you have with somebody in a one-on-one conversation. And you know what is going to be offensive to them and what's not, hopefully. Mm-hmm. And I've heard you mention that question, how would you let me into your heaven? What would you say? One person's responded to me, that sounds like a pop quiz. It sounds like something that if I don't get that answer right, that's a one and done, and I don't get it. So there's and that was a younger person. Mm-hmm. So there's a fear that, okay, if you come at me with this question, if I get it wrong, I'm not making the cut. Well, we know that's not necessarily true. So how you phrase
except
that,
it is true that if they don't trust Christ, if they
get
that wrong,
right? But is there really going to be like somebody asking a question of you that you have to answer at that moment?
Right,
no.
right.
Our name's written in the Lamb's Book of Life. We know that. So it's the sensitivity to maybe the culture and the generation that you're raising is the question. Yeah. And how can, I think maybe for me, I'm overly sensitive. So maybe I need to do a better job of being a little more direct at sometimes with my conversations, because I have 2 or 3 people that I'm praying for as well. And they're friends of mine, have a relationship for years, but I haven't had that as direct conversation. Yeah. But I know their temperament and their own personality, and I know what might work for them. So I think there's a balance, especially in our society today. If we're engaging the world today of your truth, my truth, general truth out there, well, there's got to be a way that, like the Apostle Paul, I'm going to be all things to all men in order to win them for Christ. How can we do that with the relationships that we have in that moment?
One of the things that I've found helpful, I've shared the gospel with several college-age young women. And one of the things I found helpful for them is they won't necessarily say that the Bible is truth. They will say the Bible is your truth if you believe in God. But what they will acknowledge in their heart, in their soul, and it's just built into us by God, is that there has to be something bigger than just me.
Yeah.
There has to be something bigger than just government. And there has, you know what I mean? Like, they will acknowledge that.
Yeah.
And then they will, what I'll often do is I'll say, so like Buddhism, Hinduism, some of those other religions, like there's a path to find nirvana, there's a path to find God. And so what I will talk to them about a lot is, if there is something bigger, that it has to be more together than I am, because I'm not organized and I'm not, I'm not perfect. I can't do all these things. So if there's something bigger, it has to be better than me and every other human.
And I think that what makes biblical Christianity stand out from all that other, and how we can help them see that bigness that's beyond them, is comes down to who Jesus was. Mm-hmm. So at some point, I always get back to
his
conversation.
Story.
Right, is his story. And I can say, do you believe that Jesus was a real person? Well, of course. I mean, it's a historical, and most people will say yes. I don't think I've ever had anybody say, no, I never knew. Now, I think that's a myth. There never was a Jesus. No, everybody's willing to admit that. And I don't know if I can ever improve upon C.S. Lewis's Mere Christianity. He was either then a liar or a lunatic, or he was who he claimed to be.
Right.
Who was he? And somehow focusing on Christ, all those other questions become peripheral. It is, bottom line is, who, as he asked his disciples, who do you say that I am?
And then who do you believe him to be?
Right.
You can come up with the excuses, I don't know about my grandparents, and, I'm worried about them, and if they died. And, well, okay, let's boil it down. Unfortunately, let's get really selfish right now. Who do you say that he is? Mm-hmm. What is this personal relationship that you may or may not have with Christ? What does that look like?
Yeah.
And make really pinpoint to be personal.
And I think once you focus on that and who Christ was, it opens up opportunities for discussion, I think, and opportunities for proclaiming the gospel that you just never had before. So it's, who do you think Jesus was and what he did? And then you just ask, would you mind if I shared with you who Jesus claimed to be? And then you go through it. God who came to die for our sin. You share the gospel.
Yeah.
And now you can choose to believe it or not. But before you disbelieve it, I would challenge you to search for and consider the historicity of what I've just said.
I just think it's so, like, it just speaks to the heart, to one of my heartbeats, which is how God's fingerprints are imprinted into each one of us, and how, even though each of us, when someone enters my life, I feel like I've seen something of God that I wouldn't have seen otherwise, because God created that individual. And how we all think differently. And you brought up the C.S. Lewis argument, what is it, lunatic?
Liar, lunatic, or...
Yeah. And we study that with my students. I study that. And that's a really great logical syllogism to study. And so now you have a way to interact with people who are really analytical and really logical. You know what I mean? And like talking about him as the creator and the Lord, now you have the opportunity to talk to people who are really artistic. And it just shows you how the sum of who God is so, I can't even express it now. It just takes my breath away.
Yeah. Well, I love the title of the sermon, their story, your story, his story, because just that resonates with me. The idea of everyone has a story. God has a story. And it's so easy to just listen to somebody else's story.
Yeah.
And that's, when you boil it down, that's something that anybody can resonate. You can resonate with that. And it's easy. It makes evangelism be less scary, because you're talking about the fear and the anxiety and what am I saying?
It's
am I
little,
saying it wrong?
Simple.
Just
and
boil
I
it
had
down to
someone come up to me after one of the services and says, I'm having a conversation this afternoon with somebody, and now I have my outline. I'm going to take some time and listen to their story, and I'm going to trust that they'll listen to mine, and I will pray that I'll be able to point them to Jesus.
That's great.
They had an outline. They were ready, and so I hope it happened.
Yeah, that's great.
Yesterday, this
you should follow
Sunday
up
afternoon.
And find
I
out,
will.
because
Yeah,
I'd like to hear.
Yeah.
It encourages my heart when I hear our body, when I hear those stories of our body impacting the community. Daniel's story and he and James, I really appreciate James. And so Daniel's story that he shared about he and James and the evangelism that they do, you kind of pulled that out of him, Mark.
Yeah.
But I was really
In the 9
thankful
o'clock
for
service.
that.
Yeah.
I
9
was
o'clock,
really
yeah.
thankful for that. And so I'd love to hear the results of that.
Yeah. And I'll just share also, I mean, our Fellowship Family podcast, I've been getting a chance to listen to other people's stories who are family members here at Fellowship Bible Church. In the last couple of episodes, I've heard their testimonies of how they came to faith. The one that's being released this Friday, same thing. And it's encouraging to hear from others in our body of, how they came to faith. What were the tools and the mechanisms besides just God's revealing himself through creation? What are the people involved? What were the things that really shaped their faith?
Yep.
And it's exciting to then be motivating for us to then, let me share my story. Let me pass that on to somebody else.
Yep.
What else can we look forward to, Mark? I know that there's another sermon coming up. for
Scott
this particular
Santmeyer, our pastor of local outreach, is going to wrap up this 4-week little short series on evangelism. So this coming weekend, Scott Santmeyer is going to be talking about that, and we have a new little tool, some resources on our website that we're putting together, and he's put together this a little I don't want to necessarily call it a gospel tract, but it's a tool that can be used, and it's very cleverly, nicely, artistically, but very well done. So that will be made available. In fact, we're going to hand it out.
Yes.
Right.
We are.
To everybody who comes is going to get that, and then there's a copy of it on our website. So that will wrap that up. Anything else that's happening this coming weekend?
Well, this weekend is the end of Overflow.
Yeah.
So, of course, God's love continues to overflow into us and should overflow. Right. We should still
No
love
end to that.
one another's, right? So we should continue in that, but kind of our church-wide focus on that is going to end this weekend. So we're going to actually, with those books, I'm going to call it a book because it's a beautifully done little book. With those books, we're also going to hand out thank you notes to everybody.
Right.
And so we want everybody to really think through where they've seen God's love overflow. It's really hard for us to go, hey, I overflowed God's love here or there. That feels like bragging. So we wanted the opportunity to encourage people God's love has overflowed from them, and someone has seen it.
Yeah.
So write a
those
thank you note
parts.
to that person,
Yes.
thanking them for overflowing into my
Right.
life.
I already have a couple people, so I'm
Yeah,
hoping there's
I do
thank you
too.
notes.
I've got
I'm hoping
them in
there's
my
some
mind.
thank you notes left over, so
Yeah.
next week I can do a couple
And
extra.
of course,
Neat.
the following weekend is going to be our Follow the Star. So we're going to have a commissioning for those everybody volunteering, the hundreds of FBCers, and just anticipating the opportunity to share that incredible story of God's love to us, bringing His Son into this world.
Yeah,
So
December 4th and 5th
Yep.
on FBC's campus, driving tour. Invite somebody. So go to the lobby this weekend if you haven't grabbed little business cards or postcards or invitation tools.
Yeah.
Go check that out in the lobby this weekend.
And then that, starting in December, and for the next several months, we are going to begin a new series called Every Story Whispers His Name. If that sounds familiar to some of you, 8 years ago, we did the Old Testament part of that, Sally Lloyd Jones' book, Every Story Whispers His Name. And we're going to do the New Testament part, and we'll have a lot of fun with that, with the little introductory videos of the storybook. And
Those
different
videos are
things like
cool.
that.
I love them.
Yeah, who's the guy, the British guy who...
I don't know who the narrator is of the videos.
Yeah,
You'll
it's got-
recognize his name now. Oh my goodness, I should know this.
Yeah.
And
But the stories are so incredibly well written because we've been
Yeah.
planning these worship services, and so I've actually had the storybook with me in the worship planning team meetings, and I opened and Christmas Eve is going to be themed about wonder, and so every time I open this book and I start to read, I feel like I re-experience the wonder of that specific Bible story. They're so very well written.
Yeah, yeah.
And that is coming up, and I would encourage you to go find that book. Go find the Every Story Whispers His Name book, and if you
The title of the book is the Jesus Storybook, though.
Okay.
Let's make that clear.
Oh,
So the title
yeah.
of our sermon series is Every Story Whispers His Name, but the title of the book is the Jesus Storybook.
Is it subtitled? Every Story Whispers.
That might
yes,
be the
it is subtitled.
subtitle.
The Jesus
Okay.
Storybook
The Jesus
Bible.
Storybook.
Subtitle Every
Sally
Story
Lloyd
Whispers His
Jones.
Name.
Yeah. So
Yep.
if you search for Every Story Whispers His Name, it's a little more challenging
Yeah.
to find.
But it's
Okay.
there. Amazon,
Every
go
parent
find
and every
it.
grandparent should have a copy.
It is a great book.
Yep.
I agree. So I'm excited. Upcoming sermon series, upcoming Follow the Star. Happy Thanksgiving, everyone. Rose, thanks again for being here.
Oh, it was my pleasure.
Yep.
I love to talk.
Looking
so
forward to
that's
have
all
you
I
again.
have to do. I'm fine.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, Caleb, Alicia, we'll see you again soon. The fact of the matter, guys, is that sermons are not meant to take an hour, but rather transform a lifetime. Until next week, much love. God bless.